before they even knew that they were going to have that problem. That is what sensing and responding is about. It's making sense out of noise, and often clues are thought of as noise. But how do we make sense out of noise, turn it into knowledge, and then transform that into wisdom?
Welcome to a whole new episode of Engati Cx. I'm your host Aish, and today we have an experienced engineer on the show with us. But before I introduce you to our incredible guest, allow me to introduce you to the magic of Engati. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code digital CX platform, available across 14 channels with 45,000 solutions, created across 187 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc.com, TechWorld, CIO, and many others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 400,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest. Lou Carbone is the founder and the CEO of Experience Engineering, an experience management consulting firm where he works extensively with customer and employee experience management systems. He's pioneered the concept of emotional and unconscious clue-based experience design and total experience management, and a robust proprietary methodology and perspective called Experience Engineering. He wrote the book Clued In: How to Keep Customers Coming Back Again and Again, published by F.T. Prentice Hall, which won the Fast Company's Reader's Choice Award. But before we dive into our interview with Lou, don't forget to subscribe to Engati and tap the bell icon to get access to exclusive content from thought leaders from around the globe. So welcome to the show, Lou. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much. It's indeed a pleasure to be with you today and to share some thoughts and talk about experience and experience management and the great things that are being done as we enter this era of what is the fusion of human experience and technology.
Cool. So let's get into our first question. So what does it really take to become a godfather of experience management?
I'm not quite sure. I believe that I've been referred to as the father of experience management, the godfather. I don't know which is a more complimentary term at times. But I think that what was so powerful was the encouragement to pursue a set of values around customer experience and look at it in a distinctive way, and to be the first to publish anything, but have practiced it for about 4 or 5 years before even writing about it. So writing the first article was like a voice in the wilderness. Even explaining what customer experience was versus customer satisfaction was an educational lesson. And the breakthrough for me was becoming an adjunct faculty member at the IBM Advanced Business Institute, where we talked about 3 disciplines that were going to be required in the 21st century, if you can believe that. One was mass customization, which Joe Pine brought to the world. And later, after Joe and I met, Joe also wrote The Experience Economy. That period of time, I met a gentleman named Stephen Heckel, and at IBM, we started to write a working paper as I worked with Steve at the Advanced Business Institute. He was the head of strategic studies, and what we talked about was adaptive enterprise and how organizations could no longer live in the industrial age of making products and selling them, and that you had to actually be customer driven versus being customer centric. And the article was written, and all of a sudden, at that time, I was the chairman of the marketing American Management Association Sales and Marketing Council, and started out rather oddly when I had just left National Car Rental, where I was the CMO at National at the time, And the next thing I know, I'm with folks and I said, I've just left National. And they're like, what are you doing? Well, I'm consulting. And at that point in the world, if you were consulting, you were looking for work. So when I went to the next meeting and we went around the table and everyone said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm consulting. I started getting business cards and send me your resume. Everyone was quite concerned that I was unemployed. And then the magical day was we went around the table and I basically said, I'm an experienced engineer. And all of a sudden, everyone was like, what in the world is that? And I explained what transformation had taken place for me. And we wrote the very first article that talked about experience management and the unconscious clues that we process and the role of emotion and creating that emotional connection. And that goes back almost 3 decades or so.
That's incredible. You've really paved the way in terms of experience management and also mass personalization. We've talked to Joe Pine on the show. He also gave us some incredible insights on personalization. It's things that they seem quite intuitive, but it takes a lot of effort and a lot of skill and a lot of technique to really get it right.
It does. I think for the last 15 years, or the first 15 years, it was really around education. And we had developed tools that were so advanced, some approaches with Gerald Altman at the Harvard Business School on how you elicit these unconscious frameworks. And the opportunity to go out and try to be an apostle of this way of thinking, people would just have this look like, oh, wow, okay. But then the question remains is what do I do? So when I had been doing this for 4 years prior to even writing about it, working with companies, starting from an emotional framework, and then tying all of the pieces together. And in doing that, the area began to get bigger and bigger. And I guess as godfather or father of a movement or whatever, people follow you because of a certain sense of wisdom and having studied that space so deeply that it's all I've lived and breathed from my early days as a journalist and interviewing a Walt Disney Imagineer. When I was in the newspaper business, I did an interview with this Imagineer, and I realized that the magic at Disney was signals and clues, and that they were very unconscious, but you would leave with this incredible experience that you couldn't even describe, but you would go back and try to describe it to other people. And that's where my fascination began, and then actually beginning to work with with Disney during the creation of Epcot Center, the construction of Epcot Center. And they're talking about the temperature and the velocity of the wind blowing in your face. It was just really a fascinating period. So having lived in that world and then being able to write about that was a gift from God. It was truly Stephen Heckel, who I admire beyond belief, encouraged me to write about what I was doing. And I had people that were like, why would you write about this? Why would you tell other people, this secret methodology and set of tools? And I am so glad to have shared that with the world because it made a difference. It made a big difference. And Steve encouraged, literally forced me to write the first article with him.
That's incredible. And it also feels like it's kind of come full circle from writing about Disney to then working with Disney when it came to designing the Epcot Center. That's really incredible stuff.
It was. It's an incredible journey. As a journalist, you read a story, and what clues are unconscious facts that build a story. And so I felt that was a distinctive transition as I got into marketing and worked for some major ad agencies and worked for major corporations, primarily in a lot of it in branding and strategy.
Hmm. So you went from writing articles to ultimately writing a book, Clued In: How to Keep Customers Coming Back Again and Again. And you spoke about an approach called the mouse versus orange roof approach. So can you elaborate more on this?
Absolutely. I had actually written another book that we never published because Joe had come out with the experience economy and felt that did such a great job for building the case that as I read the manuscript that we had written, I remember being in Phoenix poolside and saying, okay, the case has been built, so the book needed to get into our methodology and tools, as well as an awakening to the importance of experience and the importance of understanding that the purpose of a business is to create value and the reward is profit. And I had the opportunity to work with a restaurant chain here in the United States. It was in the US and Canada, called Howard Johnson's. And Howard Johnson was had about 800 or 900 units across the country, created the world of franchising. Branding was absolutely unbelievable. There was a Howard Johnson restaurant and hotel at almost every exit. And I got to work with Howard Johnson restaurants and their final 6 months of existence. But I always warn people not to be frightened by that. What I watched there was value extraction, which is how do we save money and not think about how do we create value. And so they went from 28 flavors to 25. They cut a 16th of an inch off of straws. Everything was about efficiency and how do we become more efficient and more profitable.
Right.
And then I'm working with Disney, where we're talking about the temperature and the velocity of the wind blowing in your face in Spaceship Earth. And I realized that at this restaurant chain, they weren't even aware people were breathing oxygen. So
Quite the
uh,
contrast.
I was so amazed that they didn't even understand that as they started to close restaurants, they would paint this orange roof. And the orange roof had baked enamel orange plates. They would actually paint the roof brown or some other color, and then the paint would start to peel off. And unconsciously, you would think, gee, Howard Johnson restaurants, they're becoming a thing of the past. So even that lingering clue of the beginning of the failure of a business, and I'm always amazed and we're seeing it here in the US in COVID, as companies close, how do you leave that building so that it doesn't leave an unconscious reminder that you're having difficulty? So the work with Disney was just absolutely amazing because I looked at the way that Main Street is designed, and it's designed on a forced Hollywood perspective so that when you come in the morning, it looks like the experience goes on forever. And at night, when you're tired, and look down Main Street, it looks like a very short walk. So this fascination of what I call the next practice, that I had many clients who had gone to Disney and came back and would say, well, we're not in the entertainment business. And this is really foreign or alien to us. And then I watched companies that came back and would say, well, we're not going to call our customers customers any longer. We're going to call them guests, the way that Disney does. And I realized that what people were doing with best practices is bolting things onto their organization. And what Disney was an organic system and culture. And so I watched people starting calling employees associates and expecting this magic to take place. Well, the pixie dust was in what I call the next practice. And that next practice was basically because Walt Disney was a cartoonist. And as a cartoonist, you have to make an emotional connection in 4 frames. So what are the clues that I embed in those frames that tell the story that make the connection? And to me, that was what I refer to as the next practice. And understanding that, and it is ironic that when Steve Jobs left Apple, one of the first people that he hired was actually a Disney Imagineer. And it's not by consequence or happenstance that he ended up becoming the largest shareholder in Disney stock at the time he died. But as I look at my Apple computer here in front of me, and I look at that rounded corner, it's a detail, it's a clue, the shape, the feel, all of it is so subtle in terms of design and the creation of clues that it's extraordinarily powerful. So that has become really one of the biggest learning opportunities for me, was to be able to contrast these 2 organizations, one that understood emotion, understood value creation through emotional connection and unconscious clues. And that's sort of the tale of the mouse and the orange roof. I actually wanted to write a book called The Tale of Two Mice, which was literally comparing Steve Jobs to Walt Disney and what the way that mouse at Disney and the way that Disney looks at the magic when he came back to Apple was an inspiration for the understanding of how to begin to add infuse design to technology in terms of emotional connection.
Definitely. I feel like when it comes to Apple products, for example, it's not like you're paying. I mean, a part of it is paying for the actual product in itself, but what kind of adds to it is the fact that you're paying for the experience. It kind of feels like you're buying a product that was designed for you, even though it's a product that's used for everyone, and it's a phone. It's an iPhone. Anyone can use it, but every time I watched a keynote, I always felt like, oh, this is the perfect phone for me. Even though this keynote was being streamed to like millions of people, it still felt like this is something that was for me, built for the customer in mind, to help me out, to streamline my processes. I remember when Siri had first come out, I thought I was incredibly touched because it wasn't more to do with the ease of communication, but the way they marketed it was about making it something more accessible for someone who had a disability. So I found that incredible. So it's really interesting. I didn't really put the connection of 2 and 2. Like, I knew Steve Jobs did ultimately become a part of Disney, but I didn't realize that you could put those 2 together. You know what I mean? It's quite surprising.
Oh, and it's amazing. When you look at an Apple product, and often in my keynotes, I'll ask a question of the audience, which is, how many of you, and I start out with a confession that I have done this, how many of you still have any of the packaging that an Apple product came in. And all of a sudden, almost two-thirds of the audience's hands go up, and I say, "Why are you holding on to trash?"
This is quite embarrassing. I just got an iPhone and the package is still right next to me.
And I've got boxes of Apple boxes, and my excuse to my wife has always been, "Well, I may have to ship them back." And my wife said, "If you ship a Newton back to them, which I have, that I don't use, but I have, and I can't part with, the Newton was just a PDA that they developed." And she said that they won't even know. They won't even know that they did that. They won't even know that they had that. So I think that was quite interesting in terms of the impact that Steve Jobs took away from that involvement with Disney-esque thinking and understanding that there's a magical dust that you can create through clues and the way that people do clue math and the way it affects our primitive brain and bonds us emotionally.
There's a bit of psychology that comes into it where when you find that connection, obviously there's a release of dopamine, and that kind of wants you to keep coming back for more and more and more. So it's pretty incredible. I did not realize, like I said, I didn't realize how much of an influence Disney had on Steve Jobs. And for that to then lead to him investing in it's incredible.
Yeah, no, I'd always wanted to write. I started to write the book called A Tale of Two Mice, and I've still got pieces of it. I may have to revive that at some point.
We'd love to read it over at Team Engati. We're all about creating memorable experiences, which that leads me to my next question, actually. So, what should businesses really keep in mind when designing a memorable experience?
We've done a lot of work around memory. In fact, one of the articles that I wrote, co-authored with Kathy Latour, professor at Cornell University, who specializes in memory reconstruction, how we actually remember things. And we wrote a paper that actually won an award from SAGE, which is an academic publisher, on this study and a theory that I have around something called stiction. And I write about it in the book. And what stiction is all about is how sticky are the clues and how aligned are they against an emotional motif, so that what you find is alignment becomes so critical. And most organizations don't really know how to align, let alone align against, here's what my customer desires feeling emotionally. How do I ensure that every clue, every signal that I send makes an imprint? Because an experience, the simplest definition is that it's an impression. So how do I continue to deepen that impression over and over and over again? So the key to memorability is alignment and being able to do things in a way that are distinctive and differentiated, but most importantly, tied to the unconscious emotional needs that someone has and that it fulfills that need.
Right. So you've mentioned the word clues a lot and signals a lot. So what do you mean by that? How do companies really define that? What
Well,
their clues are?
we can only take information in through our senses. So it's what we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. In addition to that, there are three categories of clues in an experience. There are the functional clues that deal with the functionality of the good or service. There are humanic clues that humans emit that go all the way from hand gestures to the language that we use. And those are also edified in technology in terms of the language, the use of certain words, the ability to connect through technology. So there are those humanic clues that deal with everything from volume, tone, color, all of the things that we take in that respect. And then there are the mechanic clues. And the mechanic clues on my Apple computer are the curvature, the feel of the metal, what my iPhone feels like when I pick it up. There are sensory signals that are sent to me unconsciously that make me feel good and release dopamine. And when I look at the thought of buying my first iPad, I had made the comment to my wife that, gee, this is the dumbest thing anyone's ever come up with. I've got a computer, I've got an iPhone. What in the world do I need an iPad for? Well, I happen to be in an electronics store here in the States, and I go by and I pick this thing up, and I am emotionally suddenly attached to it and going, boy, this would really be cool to own. And then I created an intellectual alibi unconsciously, which is what we do as consumers. Is the intellectual alibi that I created was, oh, I've got $80 in reward points. I'll put the $80 in reward points toward this, but ended up spending almost $900. And the question I was asked when I came home was, why in the world did you buy this? I thought you thought it was a really stupid investment. And I said, well, I put reward points toward it. But it was that emotional connection that was working that said, boy, I really feel like this will enhance my life as everything else Apple had produced.
Definitely, definitely. So, if you could summarize a couple of tips so that businesses, if you could summarize like in, sorry, how do I phrase this? If you could just give us a few quick tips for startups, for example, for creating those memorable experiences, what would they be?
Yes, I think that first of all, when we look at the construct of omnichannel, I think we need to look beyond and almost take the word channel out. That we're living in a world of what I call fusionomics, which is experiences are not linear. Experiences today are much like, I don't know whether you remember pinball machines.
Oh my goodness.
That's what it's like, where the ball bounces around, hits here and there. And the critical question is, how have you done the wiring underneath that system? And that when we think of omnichannel, we begin to become discrete and begin to think about what makes people different. We have to start with what makes people the same, and then the next level of experience design is basically cultural differences and then individual differences. So finding that base platform is really critical. So as we look at that, we must realize several things. That we've left the industrial age. Although today on election day we'll find out our president thinks we're still in an isolationist industrial age where manufacturing is king. Scary in some ways. And I'm sure that the FBI or CIA have now recorded this portion of the talk. But we've entered into an incredibly new era, an era of moving out of the industrial age, which requires several things. And I call these the five absolutes of experience management. The first is moving from the world of making and selling,
Hmm.
and that it's the distinction between being customer driven versus being customer centric. The second element is literally understanding that experiences are not linear and that they are multifaceted. In addition to that, we need to become aware of the power of unconscious thought and that we make decisions before we even know we made a decision. And then we need to also become clue conscious, and then we need a systems approach in terms of developing systems that create cultures that are much more adaptive and much more delivering on multiple levels versus just the functionality of a product, a good, or a service.
Definitely. Those are some great tips that you provided for us. I'm sure our audience is really going to appreciate this. So, moving on to my next question, how can we better understand the impact of emotion on customer experience?
There are tools that were developed, and I think that one of the difficulties is depending upon surveys are retrospect. It's hard to get to emotion, but companies need metrics that they have, and there's net promoter score, and there are debates over what score. And what we need to do is move from defect elimination to experience value creation.
Right.
And it seems as though we're in a partial rut and trying to figure our way out of the rut of fixing broken things. Or generalizations that we want to make customers happy. What we need to understand is not what customers say, but how they think. If I understand the code to how they think, that's different than understanding what they think. What they
Right.
think is an opinion. So, as I look at my computer, I'm not an electrical engineer. I do have an EE, which is experience engineering. But as I look at my computer, I don't understand all of the great stuff that's going on inside this little box that's allowing me to connect with you today from Minneapolis to Mumbai. And I think we need to understand that wiring much better going forward because the computer is a human brain, basically, to a degree. And we're evolving more and more toward this technological world. And what we have to be aware of is the clues and signals that create this human dynamic
Hmm.
in technology.
Definitely. Definitely.
So there are tools. The one that I've used for over 30 years is something that was developed at the Laboratory of the Consumer Mind that I participated in with a colleague, Gerald Zaltman, around deep metaphors. And understanding that is so powerful. The introduction of Febreze at Procter and Gamble, which is their most successful launch of a new program or product after Pampers and getting rid of cloth diapers. And what they learned was there were feelings of emotions of guilt associated with an odor.
Oh.
And everything else was a cover up, which was spray the scent of chrysanthemums or spray some lilies of the valley scent. And that only accentuated leaving that feeling of guilt that I've covered up something.
Hmm.
And what they learned was that how people thought about odor was this emotional feeling of guilt. So being able to eliminate it was what it was about, and that's how they positioned Febreze, was that it eliminates odor versus covering up odor, if you will.
That's interesting, actually. How it's such a subtle change, but it makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. When you understand how the mind works, you begin to say, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Hmm.
I
It
understand
also
that. How do I think about it from that perspective, customer back, versus I've got this product that's going to get rid of a smell?
definitely it's almost intuitive. Like it's things that seem obvious, but you know what I it seems obvious, but no one would have thought to do this. It goes back to Apple, where you would think, "Oh my God, the phone's going to be the future. This is what's going to happen," and you had this thing in your head, and it seems simple enough in your head, but to actually implement it, it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of skill and a lot of finesse. And but when you accomplish it, it's the results are extraordinary.
It is. And I've watched such great success stories of organizations that have adopted this new way of thinking. And some of it is very obvious, and some of it is actually counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Disney, for example, when they used to, the lines used to be 3 hours or whatever. And what Disney would do is post 3 hours, and all of a sudden you get through in 2.5 hours, and you go, my God, we got through in 2.5 hours. So it's counterintuitive to think, let's post a longer time rather than actual time. Uh, so there are things that are very intuitive and things that are counterintuitive in
Mm-hmm.
experience design.
So so we talked about the creation of omni-channel experiences. So how can companies and businesses and organizations as a whole, how can we deliver a true omni-channel experience to our customers?
Exactly. Um, what we need to look at is what is the underlying platform that touches human emotion. And, as I think about my interaction experientially with bots, if you will, the language is so critical. The ability to create a connection. But what we need to know is, what is that emotional motif? What is the feeling that someone needs to feel as I interact? And I believe that we'll get so sophisticated that we can sense when someone's reaching a level of frustration and intervene.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is that world of sensing and responding. So as these tools become more and more, they're intelligent now, but as they become more and more adaptable and intelligent, the future is absolutely unlimited. But I think we have to be clue conscious in terms of even words that go back and forth, what we post on blogs, what we do. Every clue that's embedded in an experience leaves an impression.
Mm-hmm.
How do we align as many of those to create the feeling, what we call a motif, which is the three emotions that are derived from unconscious thought that someone wants to feel in a specific experience?
Mm-hmm. I think the sorry, were you?
No, go right ahead. I'm
Oh,
sorry. I was.
I think that when you feel like, I think the true test of mastering customer experience is when the business, the organization is able to predict a customer's frustrations before the customer knows it and then addresses it before even the customer even has a problem.
Absolutely. The this was what was so powerful about Steve Haeckel's work and the fusion of our work together,
Mm-hmm.
was in Steve's book, The Adaptive Enterprise. It's all about knowing before the customer even knows that there's a problem. And uh, this is where Anne Mulcahy, who was the CEO of Xerox, they utilized some of this thinking that Steve had done to build some customer interfaces and ways of measuring things and looking at things. And it allowed her to call a major client to say, you're going to have this problem before they even knew that they were going to have that problem. That is what sensing and responding is about. It's making sense out of noise, and often clues are thought of as noise. But how do we make sense out of noise, turn it into knowledge, and then transform that into wisdom?
Right. That was completely agree with you. That was beautifully said.
Thank you. Thank
But
you.
definitely. So, how would you encourage small, medium enterprises to really to deliver a true omni-channel experience? What advice would you give them to help them implement this process?
It, the biggest key is learning to listen and to interpret what you hear. There was this big sense of attentive listening that was a movement. But what would end up happening is that I'm listening, but I'm so concerned about what I want to do that it becomes background noise. And listening to our customers has to be in the foreground. It isn't a background for our doing business. It is being customer driven. Versus customer centricity is, yeah, the customer is important. I want to do best by the customer. But when you're driven by the customer, you become much more adaptive at putting together the pieces that create the experience that that customer desires. Then, and some of those pieces they don't even know they desire.
Definitely. So, moving on to my final question, are there any other thoughts you'd like to share that you'd like to leave with our audience?
Absolutely. I think the one thing that I always point out is that as we've moved through this industrial age, the world of branding is so focused on how you feel about the company. And this is human nature. I mean, I'm like, gee, I wonder how people are going to feel about what I'm saying, or I wonder how people will interpret. We had oak trees fall on the house, and we've got roofers on the ceiling, and I'm like, gee, I wonder whether they're going to hear that. I'm worried about that. But we're worried about how people are going to think about us as a brand. And what we have to be concerned with is we've moved from that brand perspective, which is about product and how do you feel about me and my product, to adding a dimension of service, which was sort of this bridge. But now that we're into this world of experience, it's all about how we cause our customers to feel about themselves. And we forget that so often. We're so worried about how they feel about the company. Ultimately, it's how the company causes me to feel about myself, which is the investment that goes into the brand piggy bank that adds to brand valuation.
Really interesting, actually. I Again, it's one of those things where it's like it doesn't hit me, but then when you told me, I'm just like, wow, I'm realizing I don't shop at this place not because of it's because of how they're making me feel about myself. Like, say makeup is a big industry in this, but it's not about what brands they want to project to you, but it's how it makes you feel beautiful, for as an example.
Exactly. Exactly. How I feel about myself. And if we focus on that, if someone feels dismissed, whatever area of the pinball machine or multi-channel that they hit, that's why alignment and having a system that manages those clues that are all tied together that create this impression that's left on someone is so critical.
It's so powerful. Anyways, we've had a great talk. We've talked about so many concepts, and Thank you for giving us all of your insights. They're really valuable, and I know our audience is really going to enjoy this interview.
Thank you so very, very much. And it's been a pleasure meeting you, talking with you, and I wish everyone, and you've got such a wonderful roster of clients, I wish everyone that you work with around the globe the very, very best in creating enormously wonderful experiences for people of the world.
Thank you so much, Lou, for giving us your time. So we'll be back with a new episode with a brand new expert soon. So stay tuned, and we'll see you around for the next one.